Big Mama the Owl looked down from her perch high in the tree. Something was lying in the tall grass, a small, furry something that hadn't been there before. The old owl was puzzled. What could it be? Big Mama had to know everything, so she spread her wings and glided down for a closer look. Fuss my feathers, she grasped, a baby fox. Some hunters must have chased his mother, and now he's alone in the world. The little fox looked up at Big Mama with sad eyes. Don't worry, little darling, Big Mama said softly. Everything will be all right. We'll find someone to take care of you. Dinky the sparrow and Boomer the woodpecker came fluttering over to see what Big Mama was doing. What a cute little fox, they said, but he needs a home. The birds decided that Widow Tweed, a kindly old woman who lived nearby, would take good care of the baby fox. How can we get her to find him? Said Boomer. I have a plan, Dinky chirped. Dinky and Boomer snatched some laundry from the widow's clotheslines. Come back with my wash, cried Widow Tweed, chasing them. Come back here, you silly birds. The birds flew right to the spot where the baby fox was hidden and dropped the laundry on top of him. Widow Tweed came huffing and puffing after them. When she picked up her laundry, she found a surprise. Oh, a dear little fox, she exclaimed, and no mother to look after you? Why, what will you ever do? She took the fox back to her farmhouse. I'm going to call you Todd, she said. I'll take good care of you, and you'll be good company for me. In her cozy kitchen, Widow Tweed held Todd in her lap and fed him milk from a bottle. Big Mama, Dinky, and Boomer watched happily from the window. They knew that her baby fox had a good home. That same day, a hound dog puppy also found a home in a cabin near the widow's farm. The cabin belonged to a rough, grumpy old hunter named Amos Slade. Amos chugged up to his cabin in his pickup truck. He took the pup out of the truck and set him down in front of Chief, his old hunting dog. Look here, Chief, he said. This pup's name is Copper. Take good care of him, and I'm going to teach him to be a real smart hunter like you. Old Chief wasn't sure he wanted another hound around the place, but Copper was cute and friendly, so Chief decided to make the best of it. Todd and Copper both liked their new homes. Todd spent his days happily in Widow Tweed's barnyard, and Copper played near Amos's cabin while Chief dozed in the sun. One day the little fox was chasing a butterfly. Over a stone wall he went, through the fields of wildflower, and into a patch of woods near Amos's cabin. Copper was playing in Amos's yard as usual, and suddenly he stopped. His nose began to twitch. What's that interesting new smell? He asked Chief. Nothing, Chief said drowsily. The master's just cooking. But Copper knew it wasn't cooking smell. He wanted to find out more. So he followed his nose out of the yard and into the woods, and suddenly he bumped into Todd. The fox and the hound stared at each other. Todd wiggled his ears. Copper wiggled his tail. Todd gave a questioning yip, and Copper replied with a friendly little bark. Before long, they were playing hide and seek. Todd and Copper had so much fun that they played together every day after that. All summer they romped through the woods and across the sunny meadow. Big Mama, Dinky, and Boomer watched the young playmates. Gracious me, said Big Mama. It's very unusual for a fox and a hound to be so friendly. It just isn't done. But they do like each other. Let's hope for the best. One day when Todd came to Amos's to get Copper, he found his friend tied in the yard. The master says I have to stay home, Copper said sadly. That's okay, said Todd. There's lots to do here. He looked into Chief's barrel, and the old dog was dozing there. Todd, don't, Copper warned as Todd crept into the barrel. But it was too late. Chief was awake. He growled angrily. Todd ran. Chief bounded after him, and the barrel crashing and clattering through the yard. Amos heard the racket and came racing out of the cabin, firing his shotgun. Todd didn't stop running until he got to Widow Tweed's. Amos was right behind him. He banged on Widow Tweed's door. That fox was after my chickens, he shouted furiously. If I ever catch him on my property again, I'll blast him. And next time I won't miss. Summer was over. The cold autumn weather came, and with it, the hunting season. Amos loaded his rickety truck with food, blankets, and a tent, and some animal traps. Then he whistled for Chief and Copper. Off they went on a long hunting trip. Todd was lonely without Copper. I wish my friend would come back, he said to Big Mama. He may not be your friend when he comes back, she said. He'll be a hunting dog by then. He'll be trained to hunt foxes, not play with them. Todd shook his head. "Oh, no. We'll be friends forever." "Little one," said Big Mama, "forever is a long, long time. And time has a way of, well, changing things." All that winter, Copper worked side by side with Chief. The old dog taught him to track and hunt and find his way through the silent, snowy woods. Copper grew fond of his teacher, and he learned quickly. By winter's end, he was smart, strong hunting dog. At the farm, Todd passed the wintry days visiting the animals in the barnyard and taking long naps in Widow Tweed's farm kitchen. He was growing too. By springtime, he was a sturdy, handsome fox with a fine, bushy tail. One day in early spring, the hunters came home at last. That night, Todd hurried over to visit his friend. "You shouldn't be here, Todd," Copper said. "I'm hunting a dog now, and we can't be friends anymore. You'd better go before Chief wakes up." Todd's feelings were hurt, but he didn't want Copper to know. He flicked his tail and tried to look brave. "I'm not afraid of that old hound," he said loudly. Chief woke with a start. He lunged at Todd, howling and barking, and Amos rushed out of the cabin, holding his shotgun. "Run, Todd," Copper cried. "Run! I'll lead them the wrong way." Todd raced into the night, his heart pounding. The dogs and the hunters were close behind him. Todd ran up a steep hill and then started across the high wooden railroad bridge. Keeping his promise, Copper led Amos away from the bridge. Todd sighed with relief as he watched them go, but he had forgotten about Chief. Suddenly, the fierce old dog was in front of him. "Grrrl," snarled Chief, showing his sharp teeth. Todd ran back across the bridge, and just then a train came roaring out of the darkness. It sped along the high trestle, heading straight for Todd. He flattened himself between the rails. The train swooshed by, just missing him. But Chief was too big to get out of the way. The train grazed his side, and he tumbled off the bridge. The old dog landed at the bottom of the ravine. He was badly hurt, and Copper and Amos rushed over to help him. "It's all that fox's fault," shouted the hunter. Copper thought so too. He looked up at Todd, who was watching from the bridge. Forgetting about their friendship, Copper growled, I'll get even with you for this, Todd, someday. I will get even." Widow Tweed had been looking out for Todd. When she found him, he was sad and tired, but unhurt. She took him home and locked the door. Later that night, Amos banged on the door. Widow Tweed wouldn't let him in. "I'll get that fox," Amos bellowed as he stomped away. "I'll get him if it's the last thing I do." Widow Tweed knew that Todd would be in danger as long as he stayed on the farm. She had to do something to protect him. "Tomorrow," she said to Todd, "I'll take you to a game preserve. That's a special place where hunting and trapping aren't allowed. You'll be safe there." Early next morning, they started off in the car. "I'll miss you, Todd," said Widow Tweed sadly. "I'll miss you very much." At first, Todd was lonely and happy in the huge game preserve, but soon Big Mama came to visit him, and he began to make friends. He met an old badger and a prickly porcupine, and he met a lovely female fox named Vixie. "It's not bad here," Todd decided. "I miss Cooper and Widow Tweed, but I do like Vixie. And at last I'm safe from Amos Slade." But the grumpy hunter hadn't forgotten Todd. Chief's leg was still bandaged up, and Amos wanted revenge. Early one morning, he whistled for Copper, started his truck, and drove off to the game preserve. "Hunting isn't allowed there," he mumbled, "but we won't really do any hunting, except to get us a certain no-good little fox." Copper growled in agreement. Amos soon found Todd's tracks in the woods. On a narrow path through the trees, he set up some traps and covered them with leaves. "Now," he whispered to Copper, "we'll let that critter walk right into our hands." Before long, Todd came trotting along with Vixie. When they got to the path, Vixie stopped short. "What's wrong?" said Todd. "Let's go back," Vixie said. "It's too quiet here. All the birds and animals have gone away. This path isn't safe, Todd." But Todd wouldn't listen. He started off alone, and suddenly, clang, clang! He leapt back just in time. Amos's traps banged shut all around him. "Run, Vixie!" cried Todd. The frightened foxes raced through the woods. Amos and Copper followed close behind them. Todd and Vixie dove into the burrow, then darted out the other side. They scrambled up a rocky hill near a rushing river. The chase went on and on. Copper kept right on the fox's trail, leading Amos closer and closer. And suddenly, clang! One of Amos's own traps clapped shut on the hunter's leather boot. Then, growl! A grizzly bear came crashing through the bushes. He headed straight for Amos Slade. The huge bear swiped at Amos, knocking the gun from his hand. With his foot caught in the trap, Amos was helpless. Copper rushed to his side. Growling and snarling, the brave dog charged at the bear. The bear slapped Copper aside. Copper got up and charged again. Again, the huge grizzly flung into the ground. Now the bear closed in. He reared on his hind legs and raised his powerful paws. Copper shut his eyes. I'm done for, he thought. Suddenly, something small and furry, flashed through the air. It landed on the grizzly's head and hung on tightly. It was Todd. He had been watching the fight from the ledge. He hadn't forgot about the trouble on the bridge. He knew that Copper blamed him for what had happened, but Todd didn't care. All that mattered now was that Copper had been his friend, and his friend was in danger. With an angry roar, the bear lunged and swirled, trying to shake Todd loose. Time and again, Todd crashed to the ground. Time and again, he got up and leaped at the bear. From the high rock, Vixie watched the battle. Todd looked nearly exhausted, but he kept fighting. Nearby the river, where the waterfall rushed and tumbled into jagged rocks below, lying across the waterfall almost like a bridge, was an old fallen tree. With a sweep of his paw, the grizzly bear flung Todd out into the tree trunk. Todd's head was spinning. He grasped for breath and hung to the wobbly tree. Growling, the bear lumbered out to finish the little fox, but he was too heavy for the old tree trunk. With a loud crack, it split into two. Down, down went Todd and the bear, over the waterfall and into the rushing, churning water. The huge bear was swept away into the swift current. But where was Todd? Vixie ran to the river's edge to look for him. Todd, she cried, where are you? At last Todd came to the surface. He climbed slowly out of the water, scratched and bruised. Amos had finally managed to pull his foot out of the trap. As he saw Todd coming out of the river, he reached for his gun. At last, I've got him, the hunter snarled. He raised his gun and pointed it at Todd. Now it was Cooper's turn to help his friend. He came forward and stood between Amos and Todd. Get out of the way, Cooper, said Amos. But Cooper refused to budge. He looked up at his master and growled. Don't you hurt my friend, he seemed to say, but he was very brave. He saved both of us from the grizzly bear. The hunter lowered his gun. He stared at the faithful hound guarding the fox. For the first time, Amos understood the deep friendship between the two animals. Come on, Copper, he said gruffly. Come on, boy. Let's go home. With Copper sitting behind him, Amos drove his truck down the road and away from the game preserve. Todd and Vixie watched them from a hill. Copper looked up at Todd as the truck drove off, and Todd looked down at Copper. They both knew something important now. They knew that they would always be special friends. Very special friends, Todd whispered. Forever.